Hi, Simon here. And before we get to this week's episode, I just wanted to tell you about our Black Friday course offer, where for 1 week only, we're offering you our comprehensive online-only SUP safety course for 50% off. And that's a huge reduction down to £18.50 for lifetime access. It's full of instructor-led videos, quizzes and downloads with the key information you need to know, and it's designed to help you weigh up and make the right decisions as you get on the water. The aim of the course is to give new or intermediate paddlers the help you need to become more self-sufficient. It's all useful stuff, and it covers tides, conditions, weather, water flow planning, cold water kit, beach safety, and a whole lot more. This is an offer we only do over Black Friday week. So don't miss out on this 50% offer, and you can claim it by going to supfmpodcast.com/course and by using the code BF50. So that's supfmpodcast.com/course using the code BF50 for 50% off, and that offer ends at midnight on Tuesday, the 30th of November, 2021. Okay, let's get on with the show.
Hey guys, I'm Nick. Welcome back to SUP FM for another podcast. Today, we're going to talk to Cal Major. And in her own words, she says, I'm an ocean advocate, veterinary surgeon, and adventure seeker, passionate about connecting people to our oceans and protecting the ecosystems and animals within them. I do this through speaking, presenting, campaigning, writing, and films. In 2018, Cal became the first person to paddle Land's End to John O'Groats in the United Kingdom. This classic British long-distance journey took her 59 days. Her route took her along the Cornish and Devon coast, north into the Bristol Channel, up the River Severn, and by canal all the way up to Blackpool, by sea around Cumbria, and the Mull of Galloway, which we talk about in great detail, across the Firth of Clyde to Arran, along the whole of the Caledonian Canal, which basically splits Scotland in two, this beautiful northeastern trajectory, and up the coast of the northeast of Scotland. So what she also says, Land's End to John O'Groats is a popular route with cyclists and walkers. In fact, it's been completed in almost every mode of transport imaginable, including skateboarding, I think, by Mr. Dave Cornwall. But it had never been completed before on a stand-up paddleboard. The route took in 1,000 miles, the entire length of mainland Great Britain, end to end, from Cornwall to the north of Scotland. Cal completed the expedition in 59 days, as we said, becoming the first person in history to do so and setting a world record for the fastest time. It was actually delightful to chat to her. It really is amazing to hear her experiences. And we talk a lot about her journey based around the film that she made called Vitamin C afterwards. And it's just been released on Vimeo, so you can go and rent it there for €4.50 or a couple of pounds, I'm not sure. But it would be amazing if you could actually go and watch that. We'll drop all the links into the show notes, and Cal, you can see it from Cal's website, calmajor.com. But it'd be great if you could support her, because she's done imaginable things and really, really top drawer stuff. So well done, Cal. Here she is.
Aloha, and welcome to SUP FM, the podcast for stand-up paddleboarders everywhere. So with no further ado, let's get out on the water and on with the show. Here are your hosts, Nick and Simon.
Hey, Cal, thanks so much for joining us on the SUP FM podcast. We're really, really great to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me along.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Where are you right now at the moment? Because, I mean, obviously all this crazy stuff's going on in the world with COVID-19.
I am currently sat in my little house in Devon, and I can see the sea from my house, and the waves are beautiful, and it's almost like torture because we're not meant to go surfing. But I'm feeling very, very fortunate to be in Devon because there's a lot of green space, and it's a really beautiful part of the world. I feel very, very lucky to be here.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you can at least get out for a few walks and cycles maybe, if not paddleboarding.
Yeah. Oh, I've not been paddleboarding. The RNLI have kind of advised people not to go in the water, which is fair enough, I think, at this point in time. So I'm focusing more on cycling. I'm doing a bit of mountain biking, a little bit of running when I absolutely have to, and some nice long coast path walks. So really, apart from being able to get in the water, as I say, I'm really, really fortunate to be here, and I really feel for anybody who's stuck in an apartment at this point in time. So I'm sending love to anybody who is stuck in an apartment without outdoor space at this point in time.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment as well, because we've got lovely outdoor space down here in Portugal. So I'm also very grateful for that. But yeah, imagine living in an apartment must be really tough at times like this. Yeah. But hey, let's go back in time.
Mm-hmm.
So what is life like growing up?
Growing up, well, my childhood might be a little bit different to how people expected. I grew up in a town called Warrington in the UK, in the northwest of England, which is right between Manchester and Liverpool. So two massive cities, and my house that I grew up in was in a very big town right in between those. So I wasn't by the sea. I wasn't right on the doorstep of amazing mountains. We were never too far away from outdoor space. That my mum and dad. So we moved to Warrington for my dad's work, but my dad, from a young age, has been a really big fan of the outdoors, and my grandma instilled a very adventurous spirit into him, and he brought us up with that adventurous spirit as well. So whenever we went to school, we were on holiday, either camping in Wales or climbing mountains, being dragged up Snowdon, and outside in the fresh air a lot. So from the first, I don't know, maybe 15 years, I wasn't hugely into the sea. I really, really enjoyed, going camping by the sea with my family, but I wouldn't say that I spent every waking moment in the sea.
Do anything stand out from those outdoor experiences with your family when you were a kid? Like, did you say climbing Mount Snowdon or something?
Yeah.
What else stood out?
Well, I remember every Boxing Day after Christmas, they'd take us on this massive hike, and I find it really amusing now to think that as kids, we'd really protest about being taken for a walk, and now I'm the first one to get people outside and get them out for a walk. The tables have really turned, but I think probably the trips that stand out the most are our trips down to the seaside, down to North Wales. We spent a lot of time camping in North Wales in a place called Abersoch, and there was loads of water sports to do there. And I just remember spending hours in that campsite in the sunshine or in the rain. It didn't really matter because we were right by the sea. And I think that probably, actually looking back, was quite formative, thinking about it. Really, really fond memories.
Excellent. So how did you get into SUP? Was it on one of those holidays that you got into SUP? I mean, can you remember the very first time that you jumped on a board?
I can remember it. And no, it wasn't back then. So back then, for me, stand-up paddleboarding only really came into my consciousness maybe 6 or 7 years ago. The first time I went stand-up paddleboarding was I moved down to Devon for work, for a job. So I'm a veterinary surgeon, and there was a locum position down in South Devon. And I was only meant to be there for 3 months. It was meant to be a 3-month position, and then I was going to move on. I had plans to move to Australia. But I moved in with a bunch of guys. It was a really cheap place. It was only meant to be for 3 months. I moved in with these guys, and they were water sport fanatics. And I'd been surfing for a few years by that point in time. I loved surfing, but I'd never been stand-up paddleboarding. And when they first told me about it, I was like, what? You stand on a glorified surfboard and paddle? Like, why don't you just go kayaking? And then one day, on the perfect Devon summer's day, I went down to the coast with these guys and borrowed one of their boards. And I remember the first time standing on that board and thinking, oh my goodness, I suddenly understand what all the fuss is about. This is nothing like kayaking. I'm standing tall above the water. I can see everything in the water. I just felt so free and so powerful, not in a kind of macho way, but you know that feeling when you're standing tall on a board and you just feel like a warrior.
Yeah.
And I was well chuffed with myself, and I was paddling along. And I remember this boat came past, this big yacht came past with about 5 or 6 people on the deck, all having gin or whatever, and I felt well smug with myself because I was standing on my paddleboard, and they went past and I waved and promptly fell straight into the water. So that was my first experience of falling in as well, and it didn't put me off. I just completely fell for it, and from that moment on, the first thing I did was went and I bought my own inflatable board, and every single time that the conditions allowed and I wasn't at work, I was exploring the coastline, off having picnics, going to places I'd never been before.
Is that what drew you to it, the sense of exploration, that you can go somewhere where you've never really been before and see it from a completely different angle?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just the freedom of it, the whole freedom around it. You're not sat down, you're not locked into anything, you're just standing up, you can move around on the board, but also the idea that I could get to places. Like, I was obsessed with this coastline. I'd never been to Devon before, and I was obsessed with exploring every nook and cranny of it. I absolutely fell in love with it. And as it happens, I fell in love with the Southwest so much. That was 6 years ago, and I still live there now. That 3-month locum position turned into a 6-year love affair with the Southwest of England. And, I've moved jobs, but it's just, and I think that kind of feeling of connection to that place that I lived through exploring it through SUP was what's kept me here.
I had exactly the same experience down here in the Algarve in Portugal. I mean, when I first had my paddleboard, I also explored every nook and cranny of the coastline, and eventually just did the whole section of coastline just to try and see exactly what was there.
Oh, wow. It's amazing, isn't it? And I love how it's so different on different days. You can have a really, really beautiful sunny day and it can be absolutely gorgeous. And, you're seeing barrel jellyfish 5 meters below you. And then you can have a really cloudy grey day and everything feels kind of moody, and you can be in exactly the same geographical location, but it can feel like you're in a different world. I love that about being out on the water.
Did you start doing longer trips and leading up to doing the longest trip ever?
Yeah. Yeah, so I obviously really liked paddleboarding, and I was doing a lot of surfing, a lot of paddling, and was starting to find plastic on all the beaches that I went to. My favorite beaches, and I was doing a lot of voluntary work at that time with a charity called Surfers Against Sewage, running community beach cleans, and I loved that kind of light bulb moment when people would, at a beach clean, you'd pick up a plastic bottle and connect that to maybe a bottle that they'd bought full of water earlier in the day, and be able to kind of help empower people to understand where they could make a positive difference in their life regarding plastic pollution. And I felt so passionately about it, and there wasn't much in the media at the time when I first started campaigning about this about 5 or 6 years ago. There wasn't much in the media, and everything that was there seemed to be very negative, very shaming, and really doom and gloomy. And I wanted to deliver a positive message to people. And so I basically combined my love of paddleboarding with my obsession with plastic pollution, and decided I was going to paddle around the whole of the Cornish coast. And I was so naive, like completely naive.
When was this, like 2016, somewhere around there?
Yeah, 2016. I was so naive. Like, I had no idea what a paddleboarding expedition actually what it consisted of. I just loved paddleboarding and didn't quite realize that the 5 miles I was doing on a nice day exploring did not translate to 30 miles in a headwind with fog and massive waves that I would be doing for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, getting around the Cornish coast. But I just loved it, and I loved the challenge, and I loved all the learning about the tides, and I was feeling more and more connected to the ocean, which meant so much to me. And then the following year after that, I paddled completely solo around the Isle of Skye in Scotland. So that took about 2 weeks, and that was that was the most formative expedition of all of them, really, because for 2 weeks I was completely immersed in that environment, had nobody to, bounce decisions off, no phone signal, really looking after myself. And I got into some pretty sticky situations, but finding the kind of strength to get out of those was so empowering. And that, I don't know, that just filled me with the kind of knowledge, respect for the ocean, and confidence to do the big trip.
Were you completely on your own on that trip?
Yeah, completely on my own. Yeah, for 2 weeks.
But is that the film as a result of that trip? Skye.
Yes, Sky's the limit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you actually filmed that yourself? I mean, I haven't seen it. I just saw a trailer, but it's got some beautiful drone scenes in the beginning there.
Yeah. So I did the trip. Finished the trip, filmed it myself, did really dodgy GoPro filming, had a semi-professional camera but didn't really know how to use it, but managed to get enough footage to what I thought I was going to be able to put a film together from the footage that I got. 2 days after I finished the trip, I met a filmmaker who's a friend of a friend who came up to the Isle of Skye to help support me and to do some photos. This was all after I'd finished the trip. And I was so proud of my footage. I was like, here's the footage that I've got here, good luck making a film. He took one look at it. It was like, nah, this is not going to make a film. So we actually spent a couple of days just driving around the island. I'd get back on the water and we'd recreate certain parts of the trip just to get that beautiful, engaging footage. So when you watch the film, there's a lot about plastic and there's a lot about connection to the ocean. When you watch the film, you'll know which is my footage. Mine's the very raw, authentic stuff. And then there's some beautiful, beautiful scenic drone footage around the coastline. And honestly, I think that's I think it is the most beautiful place I've ever paddled. Really, it is.
Wow. Is that the same filmmaker you used in Vitamin C?
Exactly. He's now my boyfriend.
Oh, excellent. That's really handy.
Yeah, very handy. Yeah, we connected over that film.
Well, kudos to him. I mean, there's some spectacular shots. And as I was watching the film, like leaping to Vitamin C, I was just thinking about, wow, how did you get all these amazing shots? So, but anyway, we'll get into that later. So if we can start with the expedition itself. Now, what drove you to thinking that you could actually paddle from Land's End to John O'Groats? Because no one's ever done this before, obviously.
So I remember years and years ago sitting down at the kitchen table with my dad when I was visiting home, and I'd just got into paddleboarding and I was really excited about the idea of doing these expeditions. I think it was after the Cornwall trip, and or maybe just before the Cornwall trip actually. I think it was before the Cornwall trip, and I was looking at this map and thinking, how can I get from Land's End to John O'Groats on a SUP? And we were looking at all the waterways, the inland waterways, because at that point in time I didn't realise that you could actually do an ocean expedition on a paddleboard. And we decided that it was absolutely ridiculous and come on, let's just paddle around Cornwall instead. Which turned out to be intense enough as it was. But I think over the years and years of doing these expeditions and learning about my own strength and my own kind of mental resilience and just how far my body can go in response to my mind asking it to do that, and also learning so much about the oceans and being very humbled by them on several occasions, I thought, you know what, this is possible actually. And I really wanted, so going back to the sort of plastic message, I really wanted to look at the positive stuff happening the whole length of the UK to tackle plastic pollution in order to inspire other positive change. And so that's why I wanted to go the whole length of the UK to kind of say, whatever small thing you feel you can do in your community, that's phenomenal. And look at all this stuff that's happening in the whole of the UK as well, to try and help people to see that actually that this is a very exciting movement to be part of. So that was the kind of the primary motivation behind it. And then a bit further down the line, it became a fundraising trip as well.
Okay, and so how much time did you spend preparing for this? Because when did you go around Cornwall? Was that was in 2016, right?
That was in 2016. So probably first started thinking about it in 2014 when I first started paddleboarding. And it's, I don't know, it's interesting to think back. I'm a very spontaneous person and I don't really like planning too far ahead. So it's very kind of grounding for me to think that actually just how long it took to really properly get ready for that expedition without even knowing that that's what I was doing in some ways.
So when you started off at Land's End, you had a complication with the tidal race around there. How do you actually prepare for seeing tidal races? Did you pick them up before, and did you ask people along before when you were preparing to see which areas were dangerous and which weren't?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd paddled around Land's End before, and I knew it was a pretty gnarly tidal race. So there's a really amazing guy called Glyn Brackenbury who kayaked Land's End to John O'Groats. It's a fairly similar route to the one that I did. And he was so wonderful at helping me with the tides for my trip. I had a lot of kind of tech, a lot of tide charts and that kind of thing to try and work out exactly what the timing was going to be. And to my knowledge, when I went out at Land's End, I'd mitigated all the possible scenarios. I thought that I'd worked the tides out correctly. I thought that it was going to be plain sailing, and excuse me, and I didn't anticipate actually getting into trouble with that tidal race. So again, the first day of the trip, it was very interestingly humbling to have the ocean turn around and say, just take a minute. You're not you're not invincible here, love. So yeah, it was pretty humbling.
Let's talk a little bit about tidal races, because for those of you guys out there who are listening and aren't familiar with the UK, I mean, obviously you've got a massive tidal variation there, don't you? Isn't it something like 10 meters or something?
It can be, yeah, on big spring tides. So basically, in the UK, you've got, if you can picture the UK, up the west coast of the island, when the tide floods in, the tide moves in up the coast of the west coast of the UK. But it also floods, when the tide floods in, it flows along the south coast of the UK from the west to the east. And that's a very simplified explanation of the tides. So at Land's End, which is the most southwesterly point, you've basically got the tide splitting, so it goes up, but it also goes across the south coast. And also with that, you've got loads of jaggedy headlands, lots of localized eddies, and the tides can go in all sorts of different directions. So the idea was to hit Land's End at slack tide when the tidal movement was at its absolute minimum, but it just got it completely wrong, and it was impossible. And I ended up caught in a tidal race that was heading out into the Atlantic, and wow. Really, really got into trouble. It was pretty terrifying, to be honest.
Did you make it out on your own?
No, I didn't. So I had a very difficult decision to make in that point in time, because I'd told myself, and I've told myself on all my expeditions, if I ever have to call the Coast Guard out, then I'm not carrying on, because I'd feel incredibly irresponsible to do so. Sure. And so I was there on my first day of the expedition. I was paddling against this tidal race, every ounce of effort I had to try and beat this race, to try and keep paddling north against the flow which was pulling me out south and towards the west. And I was getting completely exhausted. I wasn't moving. I was literally paddling at my absolute maximum and remaining stationary. And in that kind of moment of exhaustion, I had to decide: do I radio the Coast Guard, or what do I do? Do I keep paddling, because there's a chance that I could break out of this tidal race, whatever the optimist, or do I call the Coast Guard? And at the very last minute, just when I was, I had to give up. I was so exhausted after about an hour of paddling against this tidal race. A fishing boat saw me. They were out checking the pots, and they came and picked me up, literally dragged me onto the boat. I was on the verge of collapse, and fortunately, the whole boat were RNLI volunteers when they weren't fishing. And they were amazing. I was expecting to be given, ever telling off, or being told that what on earth are you doing, you stupid woman, you're at Land's End on your own. But they were amazing, and I told them what I was doing, and they were very, very supportive and helped me work out the tides to go out again the next day. And amazingly, they themselves said that the tides were wrong compared to what the tide tables were telling them as well. So that made me feel a little bit better, that I hadn't just completely worked it out wrong, that there was actually a bit of an abnormality there.
Well, what a start to the trip.
I know.
That must have been quite daunting, actually. It's like, did you think, oh God, fag this, I'm not going to carry on at all?
Yeah, I did. I was like, well, that's it then. Unfortunately, my boyfriend was there with me, James. He was there, and the first few hours I was like, oh, well, I'm so embarrassed. That was so ridiculous. Who on earth do I think I am to be able to take on a challenge like this? And I was like, well, do you know what? That's it. Game over. And then actually going back to the RNLI station a few hours later and having a good chat with them, and they just made no big deal out of it. Like, oh well, it happens. We picked up some kayakers there the other day. Let's figure out a better plan for tomorrow. And there was no kind of even hint of suggestion that I should stop and not carry on. They were so supportive of what I was doing. So that felt really I was very, very grateful for that.
Well, that's amazing, because that's another question that I wanted to have is what are the legalities of paddling on the ocean, and also what is your relationship with was the RNLI or the Coast Guard, or which department was it?
Yeah, so the legalities of paddling in the ocean, I mean, as far as I know, anybody can paddle in the ocean. From a kind of practical point of view, I think it would be very irresponsible to paddle in the ocean without safety measures and without experience. I had a lot of safety measures on me, even though I didn't have a boat and I didn't always have anyone on the water with me. I had a VHF radio, I had a GPS tracker, which the Coast Guard had a link to. I had a mobile phone, I had flares, life vest, tow rope, a PLB, which is a personal locator beacon. So if I got into real trouble and couldn't communicate, I'd just press a button and it sends a distress signal out to the Coast Guard and my exact GPS location. So although a lot of those things are relying on external help from the Coast Guard or the RNLI, then I at least had those modalities available to me. The RNLI, they deal mostly with sort of more inshore emergencies, so things just off the beach. The Coast Guard, I called the Coast Guard every morning before I went out on the water, and I called them every evening when I got back to land to let them know that I was safe and to let them know what I was doing. And several times there were members of the public on the coast path who would phone the Coast Guard and let them know that they'd seen a lone paddleboarder out in the water. Oftentimes, just being good citizens, alerting the Coast Guard to the fact that there might be someone who's in a bit of trouble. But because I'd called them previously, they knew it was me and they could call me and check that I was all right. And I'd oftentimes chat to the guys. If I was going out from the beach, I'd chat to the RNLI guys that were on the beach and just let them know what I was doing and kind of get their inside info and local knowledge, which was so vital to have local knowledge, definitely.
Absolutely, yeah. And so what kind of support did you have with you? I mean, did you and your boyfriend go up the whole way together? And did he film a lot as well?
So most of the time I was out on the water on my own. James is a runner. He's a very, very good runner. So he would spend a lot of time running along the coast path. He put, to have the drone in the air on the coast path when he's running. I'd say James was there for about 50 or 60% of the trip, supporting me with my camper van on land. Actually on the water, as I said, most of the paddling I did on my own. There were a few days up in Scotland that James came and paddled with me in a kayak so that he could film from the water. And that was, it made for a very different experience sort of day to day, whether I was on my own or whether I had James with me. But I was healing a big wound during the trip. I was healing I was going through grief basically for loss of one of my very best friends, and actually having time on the water on my own was quite beneficial for that. So I didn't begrudge the days when I was on my own. I didn't feel like I needed someone there with me, and I feel very capable out on the water. So I didn't feel intimidated by being out there on my own.
Excellent. And I think you mentioned that quite a lot in the film as well. So it comes across really well.
Thank you.
How did you sleep? You said you mentioned a camper van. Was that going with you all the time? Because obviously you didn't take a tent along with you on the board.
I did actually take a tent. So whenever I was out on the ocean, most of the time I'd have a dry bag with at least a bivvy bag and a sleeping bag or a tent and some emergency rations, just in case I had to pull in at a cove and spend the night there if the conditions changed. There were quite a few nights that I wild camped, especially up in Scotland, just slept on beaches and I love that side of an expedition. That's my favourite part of an expedition.
I was just about to say, isn't that the best part about it?
Yeah, which I think is why I loved the Isle of Skye trip so much, was because I was camping every night and foraging for food and water and just felt really free. I love that. I love it when you wake up and you can see the stars, or you wake up and you're outdoors. I think it's so special. With this trip, my initial plan was to camp the whole way up, and I soon learned that. So I was trying to paddle the length of the UK, raise money for charity, and wild camp, and forage for my own food, and not have any support on the water. And I went into it very stubbornly determined to be independent, and very soon realised that I couldn't do all of that without support. So I did have land support most of the way. James was there with my camper van for probably 50% of it, and maybe a bit more actually, 60% of it, and I'd sleep in my van. There were times when my brother or my mum and dad, they've both got camper vans as well. Occasionally they'd come and join me somewhere, and I'd stay in their van, or I'd be camping and they'd sort of camp next to me and bring me some food or whatever. And there were times when I also stayed with people I'd never met before, and I've made some of my really closest friends from doing that, people who just reached out and wanted to support. That was really special, actually, being able to share the journey with just such kind strangers who had the same passions as me and wanted to be a part of it. But it was really nice having a mixture of all the three, I think, and it definitely helped me to appreciate the times when I was on my own, camping on my own, and sort of having that kind of sense of peace and space.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. If you could pick any spot on the entire journey, which was the most beautiful for you?
Oh, I think it would have to be the northeast coast of Scotland. I just loved it up there. So between Inverness and John O'Groats, there's this stretch of coastline which has massive cliffs, like enormous cliffs the whole way along. So it's a bit of a commitment to paddle there because there aren't many places to come out off the water. But the cliffs are lined with seabirds. And when I paddled past, there were just thousands upon thousands of puffins and razorbills and guillemots and the gannets, and it was so special. Scotland in general is my favourite country in the world. I think paddling there is so phenomenally special. But this place in particular, I think the kind of contrast between these very dramatic cliffs and the beautiful, the water was really calm there at that point in time, and having all that wildlife surrounding me that just couldn't care less that I was there, because you're quite quiet on a SUP, aren't you? And they just couldn't care less that I was there. So they were just cracking on, and I was able to be a part of that for a short time. It was very special.
Excellent. How about the Caledonian Canal, just for the stretch before that? I mean, that sounds absolutely beautiful as well, is it?
Yeah, it is phenomenal. Yeah, really, really beautiful. I would recommend anybody to paddle there. So the week that I think I got across it in 2 days actually, but the days that I was paddling it were really lovely weather. There was one day I went through Loch Ness and it was so hot. I had to change my t-shirt 3 times because I was just dripping in sweat. It was so hot. But I've heard stories of the weather being so horrific there, and because obviously it's lined by mountains, the wind just funnels through it. So I've heard stories of waves on Loch Ness. So I think I was very, very fortunate with the conditions I had up there in Scotland.
It certainly looked idyllic from the film.
Yeah.
We were kind of going backwards here. So we're starting and going back down to the Mull of Galloway.
Yes.
That sounded like a really dicey section. So can you just tell us a little bit what went down there?
Yeah, so the Mull of Galloway was one of, you're asking before about these tidal races in the UK. There's a lot of tidal movement around the UK, and the tidal races form when there's a headland, so a sticky out bit where the water has to flow a lot faster around it. And the Mull of Galloway is on the southwest point of Scotland, and the water flowing up the channel there, there are basically 9 different tidal races, 9 different tides that meet at that point. And so the water there is very confused, is very, very fast moving. It forms standing waves. So from the word go, that was one of the sections that I was particularly worried about, because it's just so exposed to tides and also to wind. There's just no shelter there. And I was approaching it, and as I was approaching it, sort of every day I'd be checking the forecast for a few days' time to see what kind of window I might have to get round there, because not only did I need the tides to be absolutely pinpoint perfect, but I also needed the wind to be okay as well. And I was kind of reached the nearest point that I was going to get to, which was 20 miles away, and was desperately trying to find a tidal window. And the only one I could find was at 3 o'clock in the morning, the following morning. Oh. And being 20 miles away, that meant setting off at 11 o'clock at night, just after it got pitch black, and paddling through the night towards this horrendously scary headland, and hoping to God that the tides were going to be all right and that I was going to get around the other side. And it was honestly it was the scariest thing I'd ever done.
Was that? It must be terrifying.
It was so scary. It was so scary. And I don't know, when it's dark, your mind plays tricks on you as well, doesn't it? So I kept kind of looking into the water and imagining like a sea creature just rising up out of the black, like a big eye just coming out of the depths or something.
It's also tricky to keep your balance at night, isn't it? Especially if there's a bit of chop around.
Definitely, and it was quite choppy actually at that point in time, because the wind forecast was only just marginally okay. So there was quite a lot of water movement. So I knelt down pretty much the whole way around the Mull of Galloway, which it's fine for a couple of hours, but I was kneeling down for 6 or 7 hours. So that was, it's quite, it was physically and emotionally very challenging, that section. Yeah. But I'm just going to say, even though that was really, really terrifying, I think that having done that, it expanded my comfort zone so much. And that final week of paddling up that beautiful stretch of the northeast coast of Scotland that I was mentioning earlier, for a week then I had to paddle at night time to get the tides right. And I found that section, rather than terrifying like the Mull of Galloway, because I'd expanded my comfort zone to include night paddling, I found that section exhilarating and beautiful, and it really kind of, I don't know, it's opened up a whole new world for me now, the idea of night paddling.
Yeah, I mean, I've only done it once or twice, and it's very, very disorientating in the beginning. It's really odd. So are you going out in specific night paddles these days?
No, but what I mean by that is if I have to.
If you have to, yeah, sure. I understand that. If you have to. So were there any other parts of the journey that were pretty demanding and where you felt, wow, this is the edge of my limits?
I think surprisingly, the canals inland. So the journey basically it was 1,000 miles, 800 miles was on the ocean, and about 200 miles was inland on canals. And I did that section to try and relate the plastic pollution inland to what's going on out to sea. And I found it so challenging. On the canals, you can stop anywhere. There's always a bank that you can stop at. And so the temptation just to stop when I was exhausted was really hard to fight against. And the motivation to keep paddling it just had to come from me. Was when you're on the ocean, you've got tides to chase, and you've got wind forecasts to chase, and so the adrenaline that keeps you going, that keeps you moving for those kind of 6 to 8 hours that you're on the water for each stretch, is driven by the conditions as well as your own motivation. Whereas if you're on the ocean and you're still 3 miles from your destination, you can't just stop and have a cup of tea. You have to get to land to camp for the night or whatever. Whereas on the canals, I had an idea of how far I wanted to go each day, but it was up to me to do that. And I could quite easily just stop and say, no, I'm done for the day. And I also found that, the ocean's my place. That's where I feel most alive. That's why I do ocean expeditions, is because I feel really, really joyful there. Whereas the canals, sometimes I was paddling through busy cities and they weren't as inspiring for me as the ocean. And there's a lot of stuff that I was seeing which was quite hard, and a lot of pollution and it was really, really tough going.
Because for me, the immediate picture of a canal is this beautiful wooded sort of area with lovely, beautiful vistas and things. But you're right. I suppose a lot of it is industrial and not so pleasant.
There are some gorgeous parts of the canals. Don't get me wrong. And some parts I felt so much peace. That there were birds on the side of the canal and ducks on the water. But yeah, definitely there were some very challenging parts too.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump back to the finish now. On reaching John O'Groats, I mean, you're clearly emotional. What is it like on the days and the weeks after those 2 months that you spent paddling? You must have literally felt like a fish out of water.
Yeah, I did. I think that's a really good description of it, actually. The first few days, I was waking up with nightmares in the middle of the night every day that I was having this recurring dream that I was still 10 miles from John O'Groats and I hadn't quite finished it. And I'd wake up in like a cold sweat, like, oh my God, I gotta get back on the water and do the last 10 miles. And it just felt very surreal and ridiculously. So James was up there with me when I finished at John O'Groats, and I think maybe 3 or 4 days after I'd finished at John O'Groats, he had to be in Land's End for work. So he basically drove my camper van from John O'Groats to Land's End in 2 days, what it had taken me 2 months to paddle. And it just felt so surreal. It felt like nothing had ever happened. I felt just completely lost. And those months following the paddle, I actually slipped into quite a deep depression. And I'd never been depressed before. And I found it so hard because for 2 months I'd basically had purpose, and I'd had endorphins, and I'd had drive, and I'd had this sense of achievement at the end of every day. And then I went from that to this state of being completely exhausted, and I'd put my body through so much to get to John O'Groats, and I had this massive, massive physical debt to pay back, but also I was still grieving for the loss of my friend, and I found it really, really hard. And kind of speaking to other athletes who've done big expeditions, it seems like the kind of post-adventure blues is quite a common phenomenon.
Very common thing. Yeah.
But I found it really, really challenging, and it's definitely something that I factor into, or I'm factoring into future things that I want to do, is making sure that I build in time for recovery, and that maybe I don't push myself quite as hard, because there were some days I was on the water for, there's one day I was on the water for about 20 hours and did something like 60 odd miles, and I was basically constantly fighting that weather window, constantly making the most of every second of good weather. And it just so happened that the summer that I did it, the weather was phenomenal. So I had no opportunity to stop. And, normally on expeditions, you'd have to take a couple of days off because there'd be a big storm or whatever. But I didn't really have that with this one.
Wow. And yeah, talking about mileage per day, I mean, 60 miles is a phenomenal distance. So what were the sort of averages? That obviously it's very highly weather related and wind related.
Yeah, very, very weather dependent. I'd say my sort of average was between 20 and 40 miles a day generally. So I think a good number I'd aim for would be 20 miles, and that would be the figure I'd have in my head always. And there were a few days when I'd be paddling. There was one day up on the Exmoor coast I was paddling, and I'd done the distance I thought I would do, which was about 26 miles or something, and I felt amazing, and it was the most beautiful evening. I just carried on, just another 10 miles. Just there were dolphins. I just had the most amazing time. Then the next day I completely bonked. I ran out of energy because I'd pushed too hard and hadn't eaten enough. I'd say I was aiming for at least 20 miles a day. Some days I was able to do double that. Some days I was able to do significantly less if the weather window didn't allow it.
Okay, great. And so let's talk a little bit about the film itself. When was it completed? And it looks like you've had some awards for it as well. So
so it was finished in March 2019, so just over a year ago. And last year I did a tour of the UK with the film by bike, which was very, very different to a stand-up paddleboarding expedition. I think I'll stick to ocean-based expeditions from now on. It's been so phenomenally received. I've been very, very grateful for the support it's received, and it's won 4 awards, including Best Sup Film in the Paddling World Film Tour, Paddling Film Festival World Tour, the Water Walker Film Festival won the Best Sup Award as well, and it won a couple of documentary awards as well. So yeah, it feels quite surreal sometimes when you get the feedback from other people who've watched it. And the whole point of making the film, it wasn't just to it wasn't just to describe the journey. It was all around raising awareness around plastic pollution, but also around mental health and the importance of connecting to nature for our mental health, and also for our to drive us to want to protect our natural world. We're not going to do that unless we have that connection. So it feels very exciting to know that there are lots of people who've watched it and enjoyed it, and hopefully taken some of those messages on board as well. Excellent.
Yeah. So where can people watch it?
So it's on Vimeo on demand at the moment. It's been on since the start of lockdown. So if you head to my website, which is calmajor.com, there's a film section there, and then just go to the vitamin C link. All the links are on there to watch it online.
Excellent. So you can see both films as well.
Yes.
Sky's the Limit and Vitamin C.
Yes.
Okay, so let's chat a little bit. Thank you for that. Let's chat a little bit about the environment quickly. So how positive are you that we will actually ever live in harmony with nature and eradicate pollution from our planet?
I am very positive. I'm a perpetual optimist, and I think it's really important to find ways to stay positive. And I think the way you stay positive is by taking action, rather than, it's very easy to become overwhelmed, isn't it, by the gravity of the situations that we find ourselves in. But I always try and look for the positives, and certainly with the plastic pollution crisis, there's so much that we can learn from that, and translate to other crises as well. And obviously they're all related. But by that I mean, even in the few years that we've been trying to tackle plastic pollution, we've seen communities come together. We've seen amazing action happen. We've seen beach cleans become an everyday occurrence. Companies now stepping up to change their business models so that they're using less plastic. And I think it's a bit of a slow burner, and it will be a slow burner. But I do feel confident that change is happening, and change is happening in the right direction. I think the barrier to this change, I think, is that disconnect that we have as a society from our natural world. So our lives at the moment through, decades of societal development, technological development, just the way we live is very, very disconnected from our natural world in general, compared to how, our brains have been developed to live. And I think that's responsible for a lot of mental health struggle, but I think it's also responsible for a lot of the apathy we see towards the environmental crises. And so I really think that the first crucial step is helping people to reconnect to nature and to finding a meaningful relationship with nature that then drives them to want to protect it. And I'm currently setting up a charity to try and do just that, which is very exciting. But in terms of being positive, I think it's very easy to feel very negative and overwhelmed, but actually to tackle that, taking small actions, doing something that makes you feel like you're able to make a difference, connecting to your community and connecting back to nature can be very, very powerful to help nurture that positivity. And we need as many positive, healthy, happy people to be a part of this environmental movement as possible. And so I think the whole, mental health, environmentalism, the whole thing is so interconnected. It just requires a reconnection to our natural world.
But I mean, you're so absolutely right about that connection with nature. Because when I also started paddling about 6 or 7 years ago, and then I was out and about and paddling up in the rivers of Portugal and also around the coast, and just seeing the amount of pollution, it really opened my eyes. And you're right, that connection. If you don't have it, you just put it in the bin and it goes away and no one cares.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so exciting to see so many water users being part of these movements as well. Over the last few years, we've seen so many stand-up paddleboarders doing paddleboarding pickups, or really, really using their voice as water lovers, as ocean lovers to help progress the campaign. And I think we have a very unique position in that regard, in that, yes, we can see it there and we can be angered by it because that's our playground, but we are also able to do something about it. So yeah, it's an exciting time, I think.
Oh, excellent. Well, Cal, thanks so much for talking to us. Really, really do appreciate it. But what's next for you?
So first of all, my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me along. And what's next? Well, I had a few expeditions planned for this year, a couple of mini ones and then a rather big one, but I'm just kind of putting them on the back burner for the minute, since I'm currently not even able to go for a swim in the sea, let alone paddle. So I'm concentrating on setting up the charity. We're still finalising the name of the charity, but as I said before, it's all about connection to our natural world. And I'm writing a book, which is, I'm really enjoying the process of writing, but finding it hard not to get distracted. So maybe lockdown is a good thing for me right now.
What's the book about?
It's about my expeditions, and the film, it's just over an hour long, the vitamin C film. It's an hour long, and I love the film. I love how it portrays the amazing, beautiful UK coastline, and that's something that I couldn't really do in a book, but it doesn't quite go into all the depths surrounding mental health and grief, and there are so many parallels that could be drawn between grief and paddleboarding. And so it's I suppose the genre will be a memoir. It sounds a bit weird to say I'm writing a memoir, but that's basically what it is. It's an account of my journey so far, and hopefully it'll help to inspire people.
I'm sure it will. So where can we follow you online and get any updates of what's happening with you?
So I mostly use Instagram because I like pretty pictures, which is at cal_major. Also on Facebook, if you just search Cal Major, Paddle Against Plastic, and Twitter as well, if you just search Cal Major. And my website is calmajor.com, and that has all the film links and everything on there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cal. Really great to speak to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nick.
Well, thank you so much for listening to yet another episode of the SUPfm podcast. Both Simon and I really appreciate it. And how we're doing this is he's doing his podcasts, I'm doing my podcasts, and we get together on a weekly basis online just to chat about how it's all going. But we obviously want to make SUPfm a lot bigger and a lot broader, and there's lots of ideas at this stage. I mean, we're taking it easy because we're starting slowly, but there's so many cool ideas that we've decided to start a club on Patreon, where if you really like the stuff, you can come and support us, and we'll give you some benefits. So you can check that out on patreon.com/SUPfm. It's just a way for you to be able to give back to us, because obviously, this is a lot of hard work, and it's difficult times right now. So we would really appreciate any assistance possible. But we also want to have a lot of fun, and I've been looking at something, and we may or may not do this, but because we're all paddlers, it would be great to do some kind of challenges using a platform like Strava. So we've signed up for a Strava club, and you can come and join us. We will leave all the details in the show notes on www.supfm.show. So see you there, and thanks again. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to SUP FM, the #1 podcast for stand-up paddlers wherever you are. If you like what you've heard, please leave us a review on iTunes. Until then, we'll see you on the water.